Three preachers were on a fishing trip, but they weren't catching very many fish. So one of them turned to the others and said, well, maybe we could use this time just to confess our biggest sins to one another and pray for one another. And the other two agreed. And so the first said, well, my biggest sin is that I like to go to the beach every now and again and watch the pretty ladies stroll by. The second preacher said that his biggest sin was going to the racetrack every now and again and betting on a horse. The third preacher, when the others turned to him and said, hey, brother, what's your biggest sin? Said, well, my biggest sin is gossiping. When many of us read today's passage from James, which I hope you already read, James 3, verses 1 through 12, we think of the word gossip, the idea of gossip. The word gossip, and I didn't know this, comes from a word that means like a godparent, someone who's sort of the sponsor at a baptism. And one way or another, the meaning of that word changed over time, as words often do, to mean or become associated with someone with a loose tongue or someone with idle speech. Someone who, one way of thinking about it is someone who tells a story about somebody else's business, somebody else's life, not because out of genuine concern, but just because they want somebody else to justify the way that they feel about what a person said or did. But James, I think, has an even stronger word for us today, because the passage does not deal just with gossip. The passage goes on to talk about just the destructive power, the destructive nature of words that do not build up. He reminds us of the tremendous power of our words when he uses that image of how even a spark, can lead to a wildfire, a forest fire. And I kind of picture James out there, kind of like Smokey the Bear. Now, only you can prevent forest fires. Well, I read about a wildfire that broke out in Black Hills, in the Black Hills of South Dakota. It started on August 24th, 2000, and was not contained until September 8th. It lasted for 2 weeks. Says that more than 80,000 acres of very valuable land, valuable timber, just was destroyed, burned to the ground. A woman named Janice Stevenson, who was in her mid-40s, was arrested on suspicion of starting the fire, and she pled guilty. She pled guilty to second-degree arson. She was sentenced to 25 years in the state penitentiary, was ordered to pay retribution or restitution in the amount of $42 million. Federal investigators who filed charges against Stevenson say she admits stopping by a road, and just think about how it started. She admits stopping by on the side of the road on August 24th, lighting a cigarette, tossing the still burning match on the ground, and then in an affidavit it says, rather than putting out the fire, she looked at it and decided to leave the area. James says that, like starting a forest fire, producing a wildfire with our tongues is just as easy. It requires just as little effort. Rumors, half-truths, grumblings, comments, sarcastic comments, things said in the heat of the moment and in the heat of our anger. All of these smoldering matches have the potential for burning down acres of confidence, acres of morale, acres of friendship, of church unity, of a marriage. Now, I know that there's been plenty of times in my life when I have been the one to throw that still burning match on the ground. But there's also been times in my life where I have been the person to, watch as someone else throws that still burning match on the ground and just sort of walk away from the place, like the woman in the story about the wildfire. So I've been the person that not only has the idle tongue, but who stands by idly, just listening to the things that are coming out of other people's mouths, whether it's derogatory slurs or gossip. I too have not only been the person to say these things or to say certain words, but I've been the person to just stand by and listen without any courage to stop it, to put an end to it. Maybe sometimes I sort of trick myself into thinking, well, okay, maybe that person or these people just don't understand. They don't understand the destructive power of that word or that phrase or whatever it may have been. Maybe they just don't understand how it certainly doesn't build up. You'd be shocked to know some of the things I've heard myself say. You would be shocked to know some of the things I have heard in the church building, in the fellowship hall, maybe even in the sanctuary. You'd be shocked. Or maybe you wouldn't be shocked because you know how easy it is. How it is like taming a horse or trying to steer a boat. It doesn't have to be some obviously profane, derogatory, or hurtful word or slur. Actually, one of the ideas that comes up in our gospel passage for today is how easily we can pretend that what Jesus had to teach us doesn't apply to our situation. We're pretty good at wiggling out of our obedience, as one person put it. This particular word, that particular word that coincidentally just came out of my mouth. That word, that's not what James is talking about here. This scripture, just doesn't apply to this or that. Or that word used to mean something else. We have our ways of wiggling out, and so we still find ourselves saying things like, he's not all there. He's different, special. He's not the brightest crayon in the box, the sharpest tool in the shed. We have all sorts of comments, and we disguise them by following it up with bless her heart. Bless his heart. Do we think we're being clever? We're sort of pulling the wool over Jesus's eyes here. Maybe if we appear to be genuinely concerned, then it's going to be okay to say. Then we can get away with it. We know words are powerful because it's the way the world came into being. When, in the beginning, God spoke, and there was night and day, light and darkness, animals and you and I. And even though all animals can communicate, human beings are the only ones who were given the powerful gift of being able to create with our words. Think of the power and think of what we create when we say things like, I love you. Or when we say, I never really loved you. Think of the profound power we have and what we create when we turn to our children and say, I am proud of you. Or when we turn to them and say, what is wrong with you? We have the power to speak the truth. We have the power to tell lies. We have the power to bless, affirm, and assure. and we have the power to curse, deny, and discourage. I was reminded from a person who speaks of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in relation to this passage, reminding us that he was arrested because of his resistance to the Nazi cause, and he was a part of a plot to kill Hitler. And he said, as Christians, we just can't be a part of this. There are some things you'll just never hear us say as Christians. We cannot say Heil. We cannot say Heil Hitler. These are words you'll just never hear Christians say. And he knew it wasn't just as simple as one single phrase, because in a Christian Brotherhood group that he started or helped to start, there were a list of ground rules. And one of those rules was, we are never going to speak about somebody who's not in the room. We're never going to speak about somebody who's not in the room. Well, that would be a great rule for us today, too. Wouldn't be a bad way of thinking either, that, hey, as Christians, there are just certain words or even certain phrases that are just off the table for us. And not because they are merely offensive, but because they tear down, or at the very least they don't build up. I remember when our daughter began speaking more, she was using words that we didn't even know she knew, different words that she had picked up from school, I guess, or from television. I remember the first time she said the word hate. Now, she didn't use the word hate in a hateful way, but I just remember being shocked even to hear that word coming from her mouth. It almost seemed duplicitous. Here is my sweet daughter, and yet here is this word coming from her mouth that is not so sweet. In the same way, even while we are a people called to create good things with the words we use, we sometimes use words that do not build up. James, Jesus' brother, and Jesus himself don't set the bar at merely don't offend people. No, they raise the bar to not only don't offend people, but build them up. Now, if we are only concerned about offending people, then we are not following Jesus as closely as we can. Younger children can, blame their caretakers. They're going to use words or phrases that they hear, right? When we hear a child say a bad thing, or make a disparaging comment, we know that it's not really an original idea. It came from somewhere else. Well, the other day we were walking into O'Charlie's for dinner, and one of our kids looked up at me and called me an old man. Can you believe that? She called me an old man. And I looked at her and I said, an old man? Where do you hear that? It's not that she honestly thought, even though I am getting a little bit more gray-headed, it's not that she thought I was honestly an old person. It's just she heard that phrase. Someone called someone else an old man or something, and now she is saying it. It's not much different for us, though, either. One person reminds us that the words that come out of our mouths are a reflection of the words we have allowed to be put into our mouths. If you read that article that I made available to you last week about interpreting the text in an age of misinformation, you will have seen the statistic there that the typical American spends 1,300 hours a year on social media, consuming the words that are there, but only 17 hours a year listening to a preacher. Now, what if those numbers were reversed? What if we spent 1,300 hours a year in God's Word? Well, maybe there would be a lot less forest fires. Amen.